When Governor Glenn Youngkin was running for office, he had two main platforms that he stood upon. The first one was strengthening our public education and standing behind parents, and the other one was tax cuts in the state of Virginia. Now, you have to understand that when it comes to tax cuts, they can unintentionally harm public education. But he assured us that wouldn't be the case.
One of our biggest initiatives is to cut taxes again. And it's just clear Virginians are overtaxed. We have ample resources in order to cut taxes and invest in our top priorities. And we need to get this done for Virginians.
Now, he's using the terminology cut taxes again because last year he got the General Assembly on board to repeal the grocery tax with an 80-20 vote. However, there was some skepticism on the long-term impacts of these cuts. For instance, Democratic Support Watts raised a specific objection to part of the formula starting in 2024. She said the state's payments to localities to protect education funding would be based on total sales tax collections without taking into account school age population. There was also some skepticism around transportation funding. However, Republicans in the General Assembly assured us that this would not be a concern. So imagine my shock when this was the newest headline in the state of Virginia. A math error means Virginia schools will get millions less than expected. Districts are anticipating $202 million less than their original estimates. Apparently, this problem originated with an online tool that allows school districts to see how much funding they should expect from the state, a number that takes into account the district's number of students, how much it receives in property tax revenue, and other factors. And you'll never guess the reason for the error. Or maybe you will. The miscalculation occurred after the state failed to account for funding changes connected to the elimination of the state's tax on groceries, which took effect January 1st of this year. Now, what makes matters even worse is because they just discovered this issue at the end of January and session is almost over, they can't fix it. And guess what schools are mostly going to be impacted? Well, obviously, the poorest communities. Obviously, the school funding error will deal the biggest blow to districts that rely the most on state aid, such as those in poor rural communities that cannot depend on a wealthy property tax base to fund their schools. For some of those districts, state aid makes up 80% of the funding used to provide educational services. So much for his promises of protecting and strengthening public education in the state of Virginia, huh? Especially if you're poor, basically screwed if you're poor in the state of Virginia, thanks to Governor Youngkin. I find it interesting that this is now the second massive technological error under this man's administration. First, the midterms and losing thousands upon thousands of voter registrations, and now losing $202 million to our constituents. We need to flip this General Assembly blue come November, and we need to vote this man out as soon as we can. As soon as we can.